Images can have a very powerful influence on not only our emotions but on our physiology. And when you think about it, that sometimes images in difficult situations for people who've been through traumatic events or people who've been through, developed phobias or fears, that often the images of those experiences get encoded in the amygdala, a very old part of the brain that's pre-verbal. On the flip side of that, images are also one of the things that we can really enjoy, that we can imagine pleasant events. People have positive fantasies about things. And we can use images then in a way that's healthy for us. That imagery is something that's often used and supported by research as a way to be able to deal positively with stress and with anxiety, and it's also one of the practices that we've been using to help people deal with burnout and with stress at work. So let's work with imagery a little bit, and what I'd like you to do now is to imagine a situation that you're feeling some stress about. And probably it's better not to imagine something way up here in terms of just severe, gripping stress or anxiety. But if you can think about something that's maybe on your mind in a concerning way, or maybe kind of in that middle range or moderate level of stress or concern. So see if you can identify that. And now if you've picked a topic or an issue that's being stressful for you, and ideally in that middle range, what I'd like to do is see if you can give that some size and some shape. Could you imagine if you were to be able to give that physical form and say, put it in a box? How big would that box be? Or if you could wrap it into a ball, how big would it be? Would it be small like a golf ball, or probably a huge beach ball, or how big would that be? So if you can somehow kind of imagine and translate the weight and the size of that stress into some kind of physical form. And now what I'd like you to do is just, again, see how big that is. And now imagine you're looking at that same stressful event or situation that you've kind of given a size and a shape to. But imagine it's a month from today. How big or does that situation look like if you're imagining you're a month down the road? Has it changed? Has it gotten smaller or gotten bigger? And now if you can imagine it's a year from now, what's the size and the shape of that stress? Is it still there? Is it significant? What about 5 or 10 years from now? How big does that stress or that worry seem if you can imagine that you're 5 or 10 years down the road? And depending on your age and your work plans, if you can, if that's further down the road, imagine you're at your retirement or have just retired. How big is that stress? How big does that seem now that you've just retired? If you were to imagine even in your final days, how big would that worry or that stress appear to you from that point in the life stage? And if you believe in life after death, as many of us do, look at that stress or that worry from that perspective. What's the size and the shape? How big of a stressful event is that? And as we think about this, we can understand that many events that seem very big and very pressing to us right now take on a different appearance. They often seem much smaller or manageable, or they just kind of disappear altogether with the passage of time. Now sometimes that'll change if it's maybe a big work project that you have. Maybe if you imagine it's a month down the road and it's close to the deadline, maybe it gets bigger. But eventually if we go far enough out, that probably gets smaller. For some people, if the issue is maybe about retirement income, it may get bigger. Or if someone's facing a serious health issue, sometimes those get bigger with time. But most things we can understand, if we look far enough down the road, they're not such big deals that we can really get a better perspective on those. Tug McGraw, some of you may remember, he was a Major League Baseball pitcher, relief pitcher, I believe, for both the Phillies and the Philadelphia Phillies and the New York Mets. But so his job was to get pulled in at the very end of the game, the ninth inning. Often the game was on the line, and maybe were not only the tying but the winning runners on base, and he was asked to come in and get the final 3 outs of the game or a couple outs of the game, and very stressful situations. And I've heard it said that he was asked once, how do you deal with that kind of stress where everything's on the line? There's 50,000 people, yelling and screaming, and maybe the game's on national TV. How do you deal with all that stress? And reportedly what he said was when he walked in from the bullpen, he would just imagine it was a few 100 million years down the road, and that maybe the Earth wasn't even still functioning then, and that just really helped him to put everything in perspective, that whatever he was doing right then wasn't such a big deal. So the other way we can think about this is not only from the perspective of time, but also from distance. So I'd like to ask you again if you can imagine that same or worry or stress that you just identified. If you can, go ahead and close your eyes or get focused with that. And now what I'd like you to do is, again, imagine you're right next to that. How big does that worry or that stress seem to you? And now I'd like you to imagine you were up on the second or third floor of a building, and the stress and the worry was down on the ground outside, and you were looking down. So picture the stress or the concern from that perspective. And now imagine you were on a mountaintop, and you were looking down at that same stress or worry. How big, how difficult does that seem from that mountaintop? Now imagine yourself in a jet airplane at 30,000 feet, and you're flying over that same stress or worry which is still down on the ground. What does it look like from that perspective? Or if you were to imagine you were in space orbiting the Earth, if you were to look down, what perspective does that give you on that stress or worry that's in front of you? And you can go ahead and open your eyes if you like, and I'd ask you to just kind of think, did one of those work better for you than the other? Either projecting yourself into the future in time, or elevating yourself and looking down at the same stress. And what I've found is that for about half of the people who were in workshops, the projecting forward in time is more helpful, and about half of the people, it seems like the physical distance is more helpful. So it's just tools for you to pick from to see what works best for you.